Hello and welcome to Spare Change News TV. My name is Sam Baltrusis. I am the editor-in-chief of Spare Change News. Joining me today is Richard Ring. Hello.
Hello.
Richard Ring is the executive director of Family Aid Boston. Welcome to our television show. So we actually featured Richard in our last edition of Spare Change. So the topic that he deals with mainly is family homelessness. So how did you get involved initially with Family Aid Boston?
Believe it or not, I had spent many years prior to that with at the Pine Street Inn in Boston, where we sheltered and housed a large number of homeless men and women, actually. So after a lengthy career there, 25 years at the Pine Street Inn, it was time for change for me. And an opportunity came along to work at what was then called the Travelers Aid Society of Boston. Okay, which was a smaller agency. At that time, it provided a number of transportation programs for people, and it had one or two fledgling programs for homeless families. So I made that switch, that transition. And what has happened ever since then is that the problem, so to speak, or the growth in homeless families has continued and continued and continued, and we have quite a substantial problem on our hands at this point in time.
Well, we talked about this last episode of Spare Change News TV, but also in the article, based on the point in time census, the numbers have spiked dramatically. Do you feel like that those numbers are accurate to what's really going on out there?
Yes, I do. I do indeed. I think there were two elements. There were two elements to the census regarding homeless families. For those of us that are a little bit closer to the scene, we kind of understood this, but one aspect of the growth had to do with an effort by the state of Massachusetts, its Emergency Assistance Shelter Program, to help. They increased the number of family shelter units for two reasons. One was to try to get more people out of the motels, which is a part of the system. But the other was to bring families back closer to their local community. And in this case, a number of Boston families who became homeless, many of them had to take shelter wherever they could find it. That could be out in Central Mass or Western Mass or whatever. So the state made an effort to change that, to try to reduce the motel capacity, bring families closer to their local communities and families and so forth. That was one aspect of it. But the second aspect, and this I think was kind of a more obscure aspect of the overall census, is that there is in fact a small but substantially growing number of working families, low-income working families, who work who earn anywhere from minimum wage at $9 an hour to maybe up to $15 an hour. They are the people we see in our communities, the security guards, they are the medical assistants at our health centers, they work in our social service agencies. They are gainfully employed, but their salaries are down at the lower end of the salary spectrum.
So the Long Island Bridge closed October 8th. There were, the largest city-run shelter closed. How did that affect your organization dealing with homeless families?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I know that put a tremendous amount of stress on the cities of Boston's own programs, as well as the other private organizations like Pine Street and others that help out in it. But it's very interesting. There's a real clear division in homelessness between homeless individuals and homeless families. It has a lot to do with the specific needs of each population and all. So it's not it's not from any negative reason or whatever. It's just that homeless men and women generally have certain needs that have to be addressed, whereas the families have a whole other set of needs that deal, of course, largely with children that have to be sheltered. So we did not we really did not feel much of the impact of the Long Island situation.
So something you brought up that was really interesting. So the hotel situation, like tell me about that. I know that there was sort of it's a state-funded temporary shelter, and it's temporary. You know, it's like a lot of these hotels.
Yeah.
Were there any issues with like funding, like the hotels aren't getting paid, and then the families getting kicked out, or unsafe conditions at these hotels?
The latter may be true in some cases. In other words, some of the motels may not have the highest standards.
Yeah.
But it really has not been a funding issue. The truth of the matter is that historically, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has been very generous in its and caring in its approach to homeless people, whether individuals or families.
Right.
The same can be said about the city of Boston and the city of Cambridge. These two municipalities have a long, proud history of caring for homeless, as does the state. The reason the motels are in such use, and at this point, the state's system numbers about 4,800 families in its system.
Wow.
Fully 25% of those families are in motels, unfortunately. The problem with that is that the families in motels just do not get the same degree of services, supportive social services that are provided in congregate shelters and scattered site shelters and co-shelters that the state provides. So, you know, Governor Baker is committed to ending the homeless population in motels by the end of his term. I believe that's the time frame he set. And I truly wish him luck, we all do, in getting that accomplished.
So you also mentioned about the working poor and how that's larger than we believe. What were some of the misconceptions that people have regards to people who are families that are homeless? You know, as you mentioned, like if someone's working and they're making $9 an hour or $15 an hour, they may not qualify for services that other people who don't work do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess what I would say is that the state's emergency assistance program has a number of qualifying rules and regulations, but a key aspect of that is income, you know, and families who earn less than 115% of the federal poverty guideline, that group of families, if they qualify in other ways, they are eligible to enter state shelter.
Right.
Okay? But if you do not, if you are poor, have low income, but earn perhaps a little bit above that guideline, then there really are not many options for that group of homeless families. To the point where one example would be, say, a single mother with a child earning minimum wage of $9 an hour. That is actually too much money to
Wow.
qualify for the state's emergency assistance program, okay? Fortunately, in Boston, the city of Boston, working in partnership with my organization, Family Aid Boston, we have been working with the city for 19 years to address the homeless population in Boston. And at this point, that is a group, all of them are essentially low-income working families.
Okay.
All right? They earn too much money to be sheltered by the state, and but they cannot afford a place to live. So we have run our family emergency shelter program with the city of Boston. What we do for that group of homeless is, when they reach out to us, the very first thing we try to do is keep them in whatever housing they have, and help them to keep the job that they have. All right. The worst thing is that if they somehow lose that income and end up qualifying for the state shelter system that sets them so far behind.
Right.
If we can help them stay where they are, which isn't always easy, but we try to help them do that and keep their jobs, then we can work with them and actually prevent them from becoming homeless. So we do what we call diversion with that group. We do prevention. We try to help them stay in their jobs, if possible, increase their income so that they can stay gainfully employed. If in fact that can't happen, then we do have a shelter program that ranges anywhere from 12 to 15 units of shelter at this point in time. And we will shelter those families with the idea of placing those families as soon as we can back into permanent affordable housing.
So how many, you said 12 to 15 units altogether. How many families do you deal with, like say during the winter? Like is there a specific number that you deal with?
And it's growing, it's growing. Several years ago, a few years ago, throughout the year, we would handle maybe 120 families in our Family Emergency Solutions Program. That's actually the correct name.
Yeah.
But the numbers over the last couple of years have been growing and growing, and I believe last year we sheltered over 160 families.
Wow.
Okay, so the numbers are growing, and they're growing in such an unprecedented way that the funding we receive from the City of Boston and the private contributions that we receive are actually inadequate to meet the demand. Last night, we had 12 families in shelter units. We had 40 families on our wait list, and on that wait list of 40 families, there were 51 children included. So what we have done, what we have had to do, is we have actually had to designate one of our social workers to deal specifically with the families on the wait list, to help them with their array of needs.
So when you have that situation of 41 people on the wait list, what happens to them? I mean, do they stay in their cars? What do they say?
I would say, in most cases, families are staying. And a lot of this has been going on for years. Families bounce around from friend to friend. That goes on. Families will stay with relatives,
Right.
often in not the best situations. There are less palatable situations. Some families will stay in unsafe situations, say a domestic violence situation, but they'll stay there because they have no place else to go. I think families end up I know families that end up in the emergency rooms of hospitals and so forth. And quite frankly, in the summertime, the warm weather allows some families to go in the parks. It's a very interesting thing. In many respects, homeless families are often referred to as the invisible homeless, because the city, the state, private, we go to great lengths to ensure that there will not be essentially women and children on the streets of our cities, Cambridge or Boston. We go to extraordinary lengths to somehow keep them under cover. Whereas with the individual men and women, for better or for worse, we see them out in the street, and we can see them and the sympathy is there for them. The families, as I say, are invisible, and yet they're often in situations that are not much better.
Yeah. That's what is important to me to cover this as editor of Spare Change, this topic, because I do feel like that's the fact that it's growing and that it affects the children. I think, and it also affects the adults as well. Like I had a similar situation growing up where we had nowhere to go, where my parents divorced and my mom was basically fleeing a domestic violence situation, and things definitely it's difficult for these women to get away from these relationships and then going to possibly danger, where there's nowhere for them to go.
Right.
So with that, what can we do as people who are concerned about the population, and how can we help?
Well, I think what can we do? There are different levels to approach this. On the macro level, we are clearly talking about the wide array of issues and simply issues of poverty. And we touch on the whole thing of housing, education, jobs, and healthcare for our poor citizens, you know. But to focus it more on the issue of homelessness and housing, there are, I'd say that, you know, there are probably two key areas that we should focus on. The first one is prevention. You know, keeping at-risk families housed, keeping them from ever becoming homeless. So,
Right.
so prevention is clearly one key aspect to that. That is something at Family Aid Boston, we put a lot of effort into that. We received one very, very generous contribution this past winter solely for prevention, solely to help us keep families housed and all. The other side is affordable housing. And that falls into two categories. Part of it is the development of new housing. The other is the provision of subsidies, of additional subsidies. And on the state level, there was an interesting issue that took place with the legislature this year in its budget. It actually increased the amount of money for the state's Massachusetts rental voucher program by about $20 million up to $91 million. You know, that added amount of money will provide 700 new housing vouchers for homeless families in Massachusetts. You know, so you've got prevention on the one side, a housing production and vouchers on the other side, and those are definitely two ways that can help. Just some other thoughts on this. You know, we're faced with this problem for a number of reasons. There's a growing income disparity in Boston and Cambridge, as we know. That's a big factor in this. Rents are so expensive. The cheapest apartments we can find for our clients are around $1,400, $1,500 a month. You know, and while there's so much focus on what is taking place in Boston, I'm sure in Cambridge and at the state, you know, back in 2013 with the federal sequestration, there were the equivalent, I believe, of 67,000 Section 8 housing vouchers lost back then.
Wow.
You know, that's huge.
Yeah.
That, and that just plays out to this day, you know, so.
So we're going to actually, two of my students, Marcia Manong and Karen Lynch, produced a segment on an exhibit that was at the State House from Housing Families, which is an organization based in Malden. So we're going to watch a segment.
In a relationship. I was married for 10 years. I wasn't allowed to work or anything like that. But I finally got the courage to, you know, decide for myself what to do for me and my kids, because I was being physically, mentally, and sexually abused. And I finally got out. I got me a job, but it only lasted a couple of months because when I least suspected, he showed up at my job site with my kids and all their clothes and just stuffed them there. And I had to leave work. And when I went home, my furniture, all my belongings was in the yard. The locks were changed, and so I lost my home and my job. It's a moment that you really don't know who to go to or whatnot. My mother was also living with me, so she became homeless herself. My sister took her in, but she only had a 2-bedroom. So I was basically staying with friends, here and there. But I felt like I was being a bother, I didn't have no job either. It was difficult. I would sleep in cars with my kids. Until one day I just decided to just get a suitcase, one for each of us. And I just went into DTA and I was there all day, no food, no nothing, until they placed me in a hotel. A lot of people say it's very uncomfortable, you're in a room, but it's way better than having to sleep in a car or being in the street cold, especially with your children. As soon as we got there, we were just happy that we had a bed. It was air conditioned, they was just happy. You can't cook or anything like that. Sometimes your food goes bad, but it's a blessing to have a roof over your head. Yeah.
My story, it was I lived in Indiana and we had a house fire, and after the house fire I decided, after living in campgrounds and motel rooms, that we would be better off living with my mom, so we moved back from Indiana to my mom's house in Massachusetts. And then she lost her house in foreclosure, which then we all separated, and I went to the DTA office. I was placed in the Housing Family Shelter, and I've been a part of the Housing Family since July of 2011, and was placed in their permanent housing. Yeah.
You have permanent housing now?
Yes, I have permanent housing now since December of 2011, and they've really helped me get the benefits and the resources that I've needed, and they've been really helpful.
And they're still in your life? Housing
Yes, most definitely. I'm down in their office every day for one thing or another. They're like a second family. Yeah.
I had to be separated from them, my twin sister and her daughter, when we lost housing. And she's my support system. I'm hers. When we're separated, it doesn't work. So when housing families put us back together, we're back with that support
Got
system.
us out of the shelter, got us into subsidized housing, because I'm on disability. So, and we've been there going into our 5th year. So, and housing families has been there the whole way. They help with food pantries, they help at Christmas, they help at birthdays. They had the Christmas parties. It was beautiful. This is my first year being involved. I'm a homebody. I don't like being out. I'm a little uncomfortable, so bear with me, audience.
You're really doing great.
It's my first year being involved. It's my time to pay it forward.
Let me just say that the purpose, the intention around this exhibit was to break down our stereotypes that people, preconceived notions people have around who the homeless are. And you can see, the homelessness is not about old men on the Bowery.
Right.
It's the issue is far more complex, and it's far more pervasive. It hits far more many families than really our policies are addressing. The families, meeting the families was a delight. They're very substantive people. They had a lot of integrity. They have been through a crisis that I wouldn't wish on anybody. And it's only through their own tenacious sense of commitment to their family that they were able to persevere and come through it. And what
So that was a clip that was done by Marsha Minogue and Karen Lynch on housing families, which is kind of similar to what you guys do in the sense that you deal with the invisible population, which are homeless families. So a lot of what was discussed there was similar to the families that you deal with at Family Aid Boston.
Yes, yes.
So, closing thoughts in regard, because we're getting close to the end of the show. What are your plans? Like, are you preparing for the winter? Like, what's next for Family Aid Boston?
We are really concerned about the low-income working homeless families. And our plans are to raise as much public and private funds as we can to prevent homelessness among that group. And also, we have devoted designated staff people now to work with people who are homeless, who are still in housing, who are coming to us at risk of homeless. And the same thing, we're going to work with those folks as well. So I think for that population, see, they have so much, they have so much going for them in the sense that they are employed, they have the capability for higher employment, they're usually in some type of housing or ready for better housing. And if we can steer them in that direction, which we intend to, it will be a better situation for them and for society as a whole.
So, if our viewers would like to reach out to you, what's your website?
www.familyaidboston.org.
So familyaidboston.org. Also, the article on Spare Change is on sparechangenews.net.
We have a crisis